The notes tend to be, okay, business was down 60, 70%, and now it's down only 25%. The casinos, well, they were down.
Well, good morning, everybody. We'll just give it a few more minutes for folks to arrive. Eric will not be able to join us today. He's got a VACE meeting, which is happening at the same time. So I'm going to chair it. So while you see his name there, because he set the call up for us, he's not going to be able to participate. It's good to have everyone here bright and early. I'm just going back and mute for a couple of Okay, let's get going. Good morning again, everybody. So looks like we've got a slightly smaller group today, but Let me start with some updates. I imagine you're all watching the news as avidly as I am, but key events this week so far are number one from in Vermont. Obviously, the governor has indicated that he hopes to be able to relax some more restrictions, and anticipating we're going to hear probably something tomorrow about limited capacity indoor dining for restaurants. And presumably by implication, that provides more flexibility for bed and breakfast to serve breakfast indoors as well, because that was a little bit of a nebulous situation up until now. Number two, obviously, he's indicated that they're working on some arrangements to potentially allow guests from some other states or some parts of other states to be able to visit without a quarantine. So whether we'll hear more about that tomorrow or whether that will have to wait till later, I don't know. But I think the message that we should take away from that is that clearly the administration understands the challenges that we're having and is trying to come up with a good balance of providing continued safety for the state, as well as trying to get businesses back in operation to the extent possible. And the other piece of news, which I circulated last night, is that the Senate did, in fact, unanimously, as I understand it, approve the revision to the PPP. I think it's called the PPP Flexibility Act or whatever, which makes those of you who have already received PPP money give you a lot more flexibility on how it's used, when it's used, and when it needs to be repaid, etc. So that is good news on the PPP front. It's resolved an anomaly which was right from the beginning when it was put in place rather hastily. So these are all, I think, good news scenarios. I hear somebody chatting. If you could just mute if you're not chatting to the call. And so that's my opening remarks. So why don't we just go? Oh, I did also want to add, I don't see Doreen on as yet, I don't think, but there has been some further dialogue on the liability issue. So I'll start with that one. That was the one that Doreen and I were working on. We did circulate to everybody.
I have to start all over with Zoom, so I can't join the meeting today.
Sorry, just Susan is not going to us. So on the liability side, I did circulate to all of you the document that I put together in conjunction with Doreen's lawyer and Doreen, and suggested that we consider that as a draft for usage. I subsequently had a call, some of the others of you may have been on, with New England Inns and Resorts Association. They have a roundtable every Monday, similar to this one. And a number of innkeepers, primarily in other states, provided differing advice that they had got from their attorneys. And I have asked Doreen to put this back to Bob, her attorney in Waterbury, to see if there's any further comments from him. But the advice was, in contrary to what we're been pursuing, that having guests sign a liability waiver, number one, may or may not actually have any real impact if they decide to sue you. And number two, may in fact just raise their awareness of their ability to sue you and may be counterproductive. So I would suggest that I don't think it's an urgent issue and that most of us are not hosting too many guests in the next few days. But just to let you know that we're still working on to try an overall assessment on that. The compliance document from Vermont itself remains compulsory, although obviously with the quarantine potentially changing, I imagine we'll see some new wording for that or some new exclusions to that. But that part remains in place as required by Vermont. But we'll get back to you more on what I hear from Bob, the attorney in Waterbury, on the liability issue. So with that, let me just go around the room. Let's start with 1824 and Sean.
Good morning, everyone. As Farrell's there too. Yeah, we're not much new on our side. Just kind of waiting to see once again what kind of restrictions might be loosened tomorrow, and see if it actually helps us. To be honest, we just don't, until we hear it, we don't know. So not much new to report over here, though.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks for your work on all the disinfecting information that you've shared.
No worries.
that aspect, I think, remains one of these enigmas, in that the solutions that seem to be the ones that are potentially easiest and most effective, such as UVC and ozone, are the ones that the CDC doesn't recognize. So my interpretation, I think, Sean, you made this point as well, that while these solutions are probably very helpful, they probably can only be done in conjunction with the other things, basically to provide the both angles of this. But I suspect that the UVC and the ozone are probably the most effective, even though they're the ones that are not yet recognized.
And once again, it goes back to perceived as well. There's a lot of things that we're going to do that our guests hopefully will think things are cleaner. It does kind of help that way too. Not that we're lying to them or tricking them in any way by any means, but it does help that way, in a sense that they see you're taking the extra effort one way or another. And we can all each only do what we can. There's not much else to it.
Right.
There's only so much we can do.
Right, exactly. And certainly one of the things that I've seen in many of the forums, I think it may have been in the discussion here, is just have to be very careful with sprays on soft materials, because it can cause cumulative damage. So from that point of view, you can't wash everything all the time. So you just need to be careful with soft materials, that you don't end up having safety and they end up having bleached out materials around your property. So thanks, Sean. So Carol?
We're just, staying positive, continuing to work on things, projects, here in the bed and breakfast, remodeling, sprucing some things up. I made the decision this past week to push off. At first, I had that June 15th reopening date. And just after our meeting here last week, I've pushed our opening off to July 31st at this point. I mean, we had a June and July reservations. They canceled because, of course, the Mad Marathon canceled. Another one was a wedding at Sugarbush. So it kind of opened up our schedule. And I just feel like there's so much that's unclear at this point. And I think that, time is only going to be on our side at this point. So our next reservation isn't until August. So at this point, we're pushing off to July 31st. Maybe subject to change. I don't know. That's just kind of where we're at this point.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. We're certainly looking at similar things ourselves. The phone does keep ringing every day or two, and most of it is cancellations and postponements. And obviously we've got a concern about our own safety. So we just have to keep tracking this. But we're currently closed at least until July 1st, but we don't actually have any reservations until July 22nd. So, and I think they will probably get canceled too, because I think they're for a wedding that I think has been canceled. We just haven't heard from the guests yet. In the meantime, Carol, your garden is looking great. We've walked past it many days of the week, as you know, when we're out walking, and looks like you and Gary are pretty busy there.
Yeah, we are. He's been staying busy, doing great. There's, as you all know, there's so much to do all the time, but it's a good thing. I mean, we just feel like when we open, we're going to be in the best possible presentation we can for the guests. But I'm just still, at this point, as far as protocol, I have always used a lot of like essential oils and greener products for cleaning, and I think until we all keep talking, come up otherwise, I think I'm going to continue to use those products and then do something client after, like, the minimum required bleach spray or something like that on the surfaces. But I just feel like things are going to continue to change before we open again. So as far as like, we've kind of talked about buying products and whatnot. I'm just not going there yet, until we get something a little more concrete. So
thanks, Carol. So Bob and Susan, how are things at the Sugar Lodge?
Also very quiet. Doing the usual maintenance stuff, probably more so this year than other years, but yeah, nothing new here. We're similar. We're definitely not taking any reservations through June. We have a couple on the books currently in July, but again, don't foresee them actually coming to fruition necessarily. So we'll just hang in there.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So, Gene, how are things at Hideaway?
Moving right along, doing just fine. Business is picking up. People are enjoying the opportunity to dine out, and we're open for in-guests. We had some essential workers come through on occasions. Just waiting for what he says to us tomorrow as to when we can resume indoor. It looks like we're going to be able to go down to 6 foot across from tables, which will be a big help for us. 10 feet's a lot. I'm not sure I'll go to 6, but 8 would be a huge difference. So getting ready to head in and move tables around again.
In the meantime, you've got a big tent, right, for outside dining?
Yep, big circus tent out back. People are enjoying that, as well as outdoors. The weather's looking a lot better this weekend, which will be a help. We just need some warmer weather because it's cold outside. But people bundle up, put their hats and gloves on, and they've been coming in to eat and thoroughly enjoying it. Yeah,
that's great. No, I think a lot of people are around the valley just keen to get out and get a change of scenery. So I certainly understand that. We certainly enjoyed our evening at the Hideaway last week. So thanks. So Greg and Willie, Moose Meadow Lodge, what's up with you?
Yeah, hi guys. So we actually have had several reservations in the last couple of weeks, which has been nice. Although it didn't quite put us in the black for May. And this week, since June 1st, we've had a couple of reservations. But today's project is to cancel 8 room nights. So what I was hoping to be a positive month is not turning out to be that way so far. We still plan to open after June 15th. We have had people that week cancel already. I am telling one couple to wait until Friday until we find out what the governor says to confirm their cancellation. They say they want to come back next year or whenever, but I'd really like to be able to tell them, look, you can stay this weekend, or let's book you for another weekend right now instead of me, giving back your money. But I also am continuing to research procedures of cleaning. Sat in on a interesting webinar yesterday put on by the ALP, American Lodging Professionals. Yeah. And one thing that they're doing, one of their speakers was the director of food safety at North Carolina State University. And one thing he's doing, and that I think Vermont should do, is to partner academics, industry people, and healthcare officials to come up with actual procedures on cleaning public spaces, restaurants, lodging, retail, whatever. Bring people like us together with medical experts and with academics to come up with these procedures. Now, if we're going to open June 15th, we don't have time to do that. So we're going to have to take the bull by the horn ourselves as innkeepers and do our best to come up with some best practices. But eventually, I think we may try to encourage whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or the Department of Tourism or the Department of Health to really get serious about procedures. Right now, everybody's scrambling to find economic stimulus packages for businesses, but I think we also need to be able to work and to create a work set, a safe work setting for our employees as well as our guests and our customers.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Willie. We've discussed this before, that while there is lots of information out there, there isn't a clear set of guidelines that we say, yep, that's what we need to do. Are the ones that are out there. ALP has in fact published guidelines, which I guess have been propagated from the AHLA, primarily driven by the hotels. And if you followed those, you wouldn't have time to look after your guests. You know, it's dramatic. So we need something that's practical. So I think continuing to advocate that in our dialogue with the state is a great idea. Moving on to Karen. I don't see Mick this morning. Karen, what's up?
Hi there. Yeah, I'll speak for both of us. We actually had one guest stay last weekend, which was a surprise. They were from Burlington, and we deliberated and we decided let's give it a trial run and see how it goes. And it was kind of fascinating. But we haven't made a firm decision yet about whether we have a definite opening date. I think we just want to wait and see. I mean, I guess technically we're open, but you know, whether to sort of advertise that or not, I don't know yet. Can I just make a request that can everybody change their names if you haven't done that already? Because I don't actually know all of you. I don't know who goes with which inn. So if you go up to those little dots on the top right of your face, you can add the name of your inn. That would be helpful.
That's a great idea, Karen. Particularly those when we can't see the faces as well. It's a good idea. So thank you. I don't know whether the names should show up even if you don't have videos. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So when sort of something I learned over the weekend gave me a lot of food for thought, was how to balance, you know, clearly very serious health concerns with practical, you know, how do we actually operate an inn, and finding it, you know, I think it's going to be a process that none of us really knows yet, of finding an appropriate balance. And so I am eager to continue to have these conversations as we each get more experience working in the current environment, to fine tune both the science and, you know, Willie, I'm glad that you brought up like having academic research involved. I don't want us to take on burdens that aren't actually proven or necessary. And you know, while we do, I think the optics are very important, that our guests have a clear sense that we're doing everything we can, but for our own workload, everything we can shouldn't include things that don't actually have any, that aren't necessary and don't have any effect. So I think it's just going to be a work in progress. That's where we're at.
Thanks, Karen. So can you give us some feedback in terms of your guests' perception at the weekend? Were they extremely concerned about cleanliness, or were they just assuming that you were doing everything you did?
They were extremely unconcerned, which made it both easy and difficult, because it was easy to get too relaxed around them. They were young, they were from Burlington, they are both pretty sure they've had the virus. And so they honestly didn't care. When I told them what we were doing, they were like, okay. They did not care at all. And so I think we kind of screwed up at first, where we just were like, okay. And then we realized, no, that is not a way to operate a business during this time. But so it was kind of good. We got like a sort of slap in the face, and started thinking about how we would have behaved differently, how we would have done things differently if they were different guests, if they were, you know, ER docs from Boston or something who had really lived through the thick of it. What would they need and want for their comfort level, and for, you know, honestly, the protection of all of us. And so that's going to be my standard from now on. But what that standard is, I think, is still a work in progress. I don't think we exactly know what is necessary and what's not. I keep reading about, you know, how long does the virus stay on different surfaces. Everything I read has a different number of days. Yeah.
There you go. Anyway, I appreciate your feedback on your Burlington guests. One of the interesting things that came up on the last ALP roundtable was somewhat similar, and there was a generalization, obviously sweeping, that was coming up, is that the people that are likely to be traveling soonest are the younger people who are apparently in general don't seem to be particularly concerned about all these issues. And the people that are concerned are probably not going to travel for a bit. You know, it's going to be one of these almost self-fulfilling prophecies. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Because certainly I think in general, we as innkeepers are more informed and more concerned, dramatically so, than the average guest. So it just it's going to be a very dynamic situation.
And we need to be. You know, the fact that the guests might not care doesn't mean that obviously that we shouldn't care. And I mean, I had a sample of one, so this is not a scientific survey, but when we told them that we got that, you know, these are the rules we're going to be following, they were fine with that as well. You know, when we fed them outdoors when it was 40 degrees in the morning, they were fine. So I think people are both at a point that they are starting not to care so much. I think everyone's getting a little tired of social distancing out in the wide world. But it's also become sort of second nature. And so if you just give people a little push and say, this is what we're doing, you are wearing a mask, you are, you know, all that, they're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Karen. So Mike, how are things at Yellow Farmhouse?
Things are okay. Closed, doing a lot of projects. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, Mike. That's I guess that sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, same thing. Enjoying a beautiful day.
Yeah, no, the weather is certainly going to, it looks, as you say, it looks like it's going to be a good weekend, which is great. I was thinking back to Karen's point, I guess guests from Vermont are probably used to the more extreme weather. Probably if you have folks coming up from the south, they won't appreciate breakfast at 40 degrees. So Ryan, what's up at the Hostel Tevere?
Hey, sorry about that, Peter. Sorry, I muted myself. I was somewhere talking on the phone for a second. We're just sort of taking it easy. We've reopened the restaurant for takeout and stuff. Probably looking for a couple weeks before we start outside dining and things. I'm a little different than most people because I put random strangers in the same room together. So I have 25 single beds upstairs divided over 3 rooms. A lot of my guests aren't that concerned. I've gotten calls. I've had people that wanted to come back. I also spent some time last week on a worldwide Hostel World conference where the CEO of Hostel World talked about it. And he was really positive and upbeat that people are going to want to start traveling. Most of it, where they were seeing, is they're going to be a lot more domestic travel than international. He did specifically mention Canada and the US. The close border ties there, they will travel back and forth quite a bit. But we're sort of hanging in, and we're trying to figure out where we're going to go from here is what we're looking at. And I'm looking to reopen the hostel beds around June 15th based on what the governor says.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the update. Yeah, you certainly are a somewhat different situation from the rest of us. But again, I guess more of your clientele is probably younger as well. So that's probably a good thing. So moving on, Kim at the Round Barn, what's new?
So we have a reservation on the books for the week of the 15th, but they are from Boston. And I have a feeling they are going to be included in the zip code that will not be welcome here in Vermont. So we'll likely have to cancel that. Our next reservations aren't until the 3rd week of July, and they are guests. They are regular guests who come 3 or 4 times a year. So we're pretty certain that they are going to stay on the books. That might be our first reservation. I'm not sure. We don't feel comfortable at this time opening the house opening the individual rooms to individual travelers. We feel more comfortable just because of our structure, inviting groups to the house who are parts of trusted households or who are family members traveling together. And even if there's only 6 of them, I'd rather rent the whole house to them rather than have 3 rooms of individual travelers. So we're working on reframing all of our listings to make that a possibility and maybe even make it a probability. As far as, I'm sure maybe you don't know, but from this point on in the season, all of our weekends are typically booked with wedding parties, our own wedding parties. So we've never been in a position to have to market weekends. We market weekdays. So it's an upside down world for us, for all of us, but in this particular aspect of it for us, we're going to try to do some loyalty promotions where, guests who in the past have come on weekdays now have the opportunity to come on weekends, but we're going to keep our marketing for that pretty tight to our long time multiple stay guests. We just know how to communicate with them. That doesn't make them any less likely to be infected or to infect us. We just know how to speak to them and they know what our protocols are. So we're going to concentrate there. Just to chime in on weddings, at this point, all of our weddings through August have rescheduled to 2021. So we're looking at our first wedding being, our first wedding still on the books is August 29th, I believe, but they all have secondary dates in 2021. And I think it'll just be a matter of time before they all cancel or postpone. Just a little note from the task force on reopening the wedding sector. Our plan has been delivered to the ACCD. It is still in review. It has not been presented to the health department yet, which I believe is who has the final say on it. We're working very hard to differentiate the wedding sector from both restaurants and large events like concerts, races, fairs. There is a group from the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber that is working on that festival protocol. But we want to be very different than that festival protocol. Our constituents are completely different than the wedding sector. Our constituents at a wedding are usually cohorts or they're trusted members of family. They are all tangentially interconnected in some way. So there's an intimacy there that is very different than at a festival or a fair, and it needs to be addressed differently. Also, another reason that we're being very, very clear about needing the wedding sector to have their own guidelines for both our protection and the protection of our guests is that we do have a larger number of vendors who have very close contact with either the hosts or the couple and or guests. So it's a much closer, and again, I'll use the word much more intimate connection at a wedding or a social event than it is at a festival or a convention or something like that. I don't want to say our beef, but our reason for wanting to differentiate from the restaurant sector is, again, the constituency, but from the opposite reason. Restaurants are typically tables of 2, 4, 6 who don't know each other and need to be separated. But at a wedding, again, they're cohorts usually, and the separation requirements are different. Also, the capacity restrictions need to be different. We need to be at 100 to 150 by September at the latest. if we're going to salvage any part of the 2020 wedding season. And I don't mean just me, I mean the wedding industry. I've already actually in my heart written off September, and the first week of October already canceled. 3 weddings for the first week of October already postponed. So I don't hold out much hope for my business, but there are others that still have a lot of business on the books. And, the more we can do to get the sector open, the better off we are. We are expecting to hear something by next week, whether there's an announcement by the governor next week or not, but we're expecting to get some clear direction on what our timeline will be by next week.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Thanks for all your hard work in the wedding sector. It's appreciated. Moving on to Dana and Jan. How's the Empire going there?
Hey guys, how you doing? So things are, slow. Obviously, we're getting a bunch of projects done like everyone else is. We've been very fortunate to be able to spend more time up here where we normally come up on the weekends and just rush through things. So we've been pretty much secluded up here. What is it, 10 weeks now?
Since March 13th.
Since March 13th. So yeah, a lot of projects being done. We had also had some guests, which have been, great to at least see something trickling in. Between our facilities, we have like 85 to 90% of our rooms are all accessed from the outside, which is, puts us in a pretty good, spot to have our guests feel comfortable coming and staying here. We've shut down our lobby, so nobody can come into the lobby. We have texted the few guests that we've had and let them know, what their passcodes are to get into their rooms, their keyless entry rooms. So far it's been, received positively from the few guests that we have had. But yeah, it's, we're nowhere near break even at all. And I can't see that until the foreseeable future.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I appreciate the update there. So how are your guests reacting to new procedures and guidelines?
They've been positive about it. I mean, because we, explicitly state with them that there is 0 contact whatsoever. We thought that there would have been a little bit of pushback of not being able to get coffee because we have coffee in our lobbies. We don't have any coffee makers in the rooms, but everyone seems to understand. There hasn't been any pushback at all. Would you say, Dana?
No.
Yeah. And it's not like, you're bringing one person in after another in the same room because there's not the demand for that. So it'll be interesting once we all kind of figure out what the proper protocol should be for cleaning and to see if we're all able to maintain that. Obviously, that's not an issue. It's a bit of a moot point right now, but the contactless entry is seemed to be perceived quite well.
Good. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate the feedback there. I see Eric has joined us again, so I'll pass it over to Eric in just a second. One thing I didn't mention, obviously, as you're all aware, the Vermont stimulus package, whatever that's going to be called, is doing the rounds. And apparently both the House committee and the Senate committee met on Tuesday afternoon to discuss it. I haven't seen any feedback since then. Along with VIBA, I provided some input, and I know the Vermont Chamber has done this as well, to the committee, basically to try and provide more flexibility and less rules in what the governor originally proposed. So whether we'll be able to get an update on that tomorrow from the governor, I don't know. I don't know whether any of the rest of you have heard any feedback from that, but it's obviously should be beneficial. The VIBA, which I think is echoed by the Vermont Chamber recommendation, was, cut through the red tape, just give everyone 10% of the average of the last 3 years' revenues or something equivalent to that for new businesses, and get on with it. and make it as a grant. So whether that actually is what happens remains to be seen. But that's the general direction is number one, make it easy. Number two, make it flexible in terms of everybody should be automatically eligible. And number three, for heaven's sake, make it a grant, not a loan. Last thing we all want right now is more future obligations. So we'll see what happens. So with that, let me pass it back to Eric for a quick wrap up. We've been right around the table, Eric, so everyone's had a chance to say their piece.
Oh,
Can I pop in here-
great.
can I pop in here just for a second? I do know that the Senate Finance Committee is taking testimony today from the wedding industry and from the rental industry. So my feeling is that it's not a done deal yet, despite their meeting on Tuesday, because there's still some ancillary conversations taking place. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Back to you, Eric.
Well, I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the meeting. I had another meeting with the Vermont Association of Chamber Executives, which was pretty interesting. And that just finished up. So I'm having Zoom meeting fatigue, I think. There was some interesting information coming out of that VASE meeting. The biggest players in that are obviously the Vermont Chamber and the Lake Champlain Chamber, and they're the only two organizations that really provide real lobbying, and all the lobbying that we do really goes through those two organizations. And so the critics over there have said that the $400 million proposal that the governor has put out there is really getting bogged down in details. There's a lot of pressure on them to move because businesses need some of these grants yesterday. So what they, after the meeting with Senator Tim Ash, our contacts at both Lake Champlain Chamber and Vermont Chamber seem to think that the idea at this point is they're going to put about $50 million worth of grants out within the next week to get that money out there, and that the balance, another 350 million, will take a little bit longer because they're trying to get it right, which I can appreciate. But there was definitely, the feeling that I got from a lot of the chamber executives that were on the call was just how frustrated their members are in terms of getting help. So they hear that loud and clear. Their gut is, and what Betsy Bishop from the Vermont Chamber kept reiterating is the fact that they don't like the idea of just giving money to businesses, and they're not grasping the fact, and that the businesses aren't failing because they did anything wrong. It's they're having issues because the government closed them down, and so I think there's a little bit of a disconnect there. That's what was passed along to us, which was interesting. The other thing that came out of this meeting was this $4 to $5 million in marketing money that is part of this whole thing. The vast majority of the chamber executives in on that call, were just absolutely horrified that we were going to consider spending twice as much money by the end of this year to market to 600,000 Vermonters than we would to try to entice 80 million people to come to freaking Vermont from the northeastern megalopolis. So, it's very frustrating, the fact that we actually have to have these freaking arguments, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm at the end of my rope with it, and it's astounding that people are willing to just piss money away like that. What it's come down to, and I think what the Vermont Chamber and the Vermont Association of Chamber Executives is proposing, and what I think is going to happen eventually, is that $5 million of marketing money, 3.7 million of it will be reserved to promote Vermont outside of Vermont. And the balance of the 1.25 million, which is still an extravagant amount of money, to market to in-state, that's going to happen. And they're going to want that to happen. And what we're trying to figure out is how can we make the best use of that money. I'm really seeing it becoming a money grab, frankly. It's disgusting. I had a meeting with the Central Vermont Chamber last week that started off with, hey, what kind of tagline do you think we should be using? And I'm like, really? Like, it was just a way for them to grab money. And we have a really good relationship with the folks at Waterbury Tourism and with and Stowe Area Association. They're very like-minded with us. They have the attitude of, we don't want to piss this money away, but God, if they're going to make us take it, let's come up with some really good ways that we can do this and take advantage of it that will have a lasting impact. And we're looking at various things that we all have in common, things like trail systems, things like the fact that we all have Route 100, kind of tying us together, the fact that we both have federal scenic byways, that there are things that kind of tie us together that we might be able to use, but everyone is trying to kind of create a way to get money to our businesses, and that's what we're trying to do. But honestly, the state is talking about creating apps and coupon programs and other shit like that, which is just not what we need right now. It's just not. So that's what we're working on. The more between you guys and I'm sorry to ramble on, but I just got out of this meeting, and in my mind, I think the best thing for us right now might be to really come up with programs for the Mad River Valley that will have long-lasting impacts, and go it alone and try to get funds for us for what we need and make a good case for it and hope for the best. And Joshua from the Mad River Planning District has really encouraged me to go that route from his experience in grant writing and has offered our help with that. So that's sort of the direction I'm sort of imagining at this point. And we'll be discussing that at a board level. But I wanted you to know where things are at. Yeah. And the bottom line is that money needs to be spent by the end of the year, which is crazy. So you can't come up with new programs and have them done in the short term. And so it's a challenging situation, but we're working on it, and we're trying to leverage as much of it for us as we can. Does anyone have any questions about that end of it? I know it's not necessarily lodging specific.
Eric, yeah, just a quick question. So when you apply for the grant, you'll be applying along with Waterbury, Revitalizing Waterbury and Stowe Area Association, right?
At this point, there isn't even a process in place for a granting process. Betsy and Kathy over at Lake Champlain Chamber seem to be, the way they're reading the wind is that they think that's the way it's going to go, in terms of having that there's going to be a list of criteria and a grant writing process. My initial reaction is yes, I think we should do it jointly, because I think it makes sense in a lot of ways, and I think it adds gravitas by having 3 established organizations. And we've already met twice, and we're meeting again actually in a half hour to talk about it some more. There are some natural things, and by having the gravitas of these 3, established organizations asking for the money, working together with the track record that we have, that might give us more opportunity to actually be successful with that. As that's going on and with legislation comes through, I'm hedging my bet, and I'm thinking about if I was going to do this alone, what would it be like?
Because I thought the original intent of the governor was to get regions to apply for this money. So they were talking like 6 different regions of the state to partner with each other.
Right. And Willie, I know, and not to date you, but you've been around long enough, and I think you recall the whole RMO thing from way back, right?
Yeah. That was a money grab. Talk about money grabs. It
was. And I literally, I think, lost 3 or 4 years of my life in terms of my coronary health dealing with George Malik in the Central Vermont Chamber.
Yes.
And it was unfreaking believable. And the comment that I made, the only comment that I really made in the meeting that I just got out of,
after listening to this crap. And and it's weird. I think I was the oldest person in the room because there were only a couple of us that remembered this. And I'm like, and my point was for us to swing back to this RMO model after it clearly failed and was nothing but a money grab. I'm just disgusted that the state would do this. And the fact that, the Heather Pelhams of the world don't know their own history is fucking astounding to me.
Yeah.
Willie. It really
She
is.
may not have been around back then. So just for the benefit of others who don't know, RMO is regional marketing organizations. The state was broken up into these, and they picked one chamber of commerce for each region to manage funding, marketing funding. Instead of the state spending the money, they were going to give it to the regions. But then the chambers who were in charge of the money, of course, used that money to benefit them and their members first before it was,
Yeah, and I think, and it's like a lot of structures, over the years, they vacillate between centralized to decentralized over time. And we are in a very currently VDTM is centralized. The money is being spent out of state. We're trying to get people to come to Vermont. 95% of our hospitality revenue comes from out of state. So that makes sense. Going back, it's 15, 20 years. I think it was 20 years ago, right? And it didn't make sense back then. And it doesn't make sense now. They're unnatural alliances. And in some ways you can make it work in theory, but what happened at that point in time was money that could have been used to market out of state was used to create walking tour maps of Barrie. Instead, really nice walking tour maps of Barrie, but
right.
Yeah. So we're fighting really hard against that.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Certainly, you probably saw the email from Heidi that came out this week, and she seems to be saying that the word is getting around that this needs to be balanced along the lines you're suggesting of really ensuring that we're amplifying the marketing of Vermont to the outside. And I think your approach of ensuring that anything that does get earmarked internally is dual purpose, so that it does leverage us for the long term. So it's an opportunity, but needs to be managed to avoid just pissing away money, as you say. So anything else, Eric, before we wrap up?
The only thing I was going to add, I was hoping to get all of your best practices up onto the website prior to this meeting. I will do that. I have not done it yet. I got it about half done, but I will send out an email when it's up and running and have you take a look at it and make sure it is the way you want it and is useful, so we can have that to share with other lodge owners. And I think, frankly, a lot of other businesses as well, not just lodge owners, will appreciate the work that you're doing, because I think it's apropos to a lot of different ones. So that'll be useful, and I'll make that available to the rest of the business community as well. So thanks for doing that.
Eric, I was going to just talk a little bit about my conversation with Farrell and Tim about the bathroom and common room task force. I can do that, or I can just send you a list of recommendations.
Well, you can certainly send me the list of recommendations for sure, but if you want to go review it right now, if you haven't already, sure.
Okay. I mean, just very quickly, I think probably we all already know what needs to be done. This is not rocket science, and you've all been doing this a lot longer than I have. So, again, trying to balance the science and the risks against the burden of housekeeping during this time. At the moment, honestly, it's not that big a deal, because if we have any guests at all, they are few and far between. And the thing that we have mostly on our side for disinfecting purposes is time. You wait a few days and a room disinfects itself. But gearing up for the point, hopefully not too far in the future, where we can start flipping rooms relatively closely, that's when it's going to be more of an issue. And so just a few of the things that came up that, again, you probably know this, but very important is disinfecting can't happen until a surface is clean. And so it's always, always a two-step process. Even if you're using a Lysol disinfectant cleaner, you still have to do it twice, right? Time matters. If you're using what I'm doing, I'm cleaning the crap out of everything, and then I'm going back and spritzing everything with 70% alcohol. The alcohol needs to stay wet for apparently 5 minutes, though I keep seeing different numbers. And that's tricky, especially on a vertical surface. You spray a light switch, most of it's going to drip off, and so you got to check your paint. Most of it will drip off, but somehow enough of it needs to stay on for 5 minutes for it actually to do its job. And Farrell, please chime in. That's just going to be a challenge, but also not. One thing I found after my guests left, I waited 3 days before I cleaned because I had that luxury because nobody else was coming. But then I just cleaned and cleaned and then spritzed and spritzed. It wasn't actually that hard. The common areas are a little trickier to try to figure out what is at risk. Farrell had some good ideas about that, like just eliminating things that are unnecessary, that could potentially have multiple sets of hands on them. Coffee table books, magazines, things like that. We really don't know how long the virus would stay on a magazine, but since we don't know and since it's not really necessary, unless you feel it's critical, just take it out. Things like reducing the likelihood that someone's going to use a light switch or something like that in a common area. As soon as the sun starts dipping down, just turn on all the lights yourself. So then nobody else needs to touch it. A lot of this is just harm reduction and risk reduction. So if nobody else is touching it, it's not going to get dirty. But unless by you. Vacuum with a HEPA filter. The suggestion to get rid of decorative rugs on bathroom floors, I'm honestly not sure that's necessary. I have not seen any evidence that coronavirus is spread through the bottom of people's feet, but you can do that. You can also just wash decorative rugs between guests. Toilet paper rolls, we had quite a contentious conversation about this, whether or not, even if only like 12 sheets of toilet paper have been used by one guest, do you need to put a new roll of toilet paper? We probably all have our own practices around that, about like when it's time to change the toilet paper. I'm thinking maybe just rotating through. So if, this much toilet paper is used by one guest and someone else is coming the day after tomorrow, take that roll out, put it away, put a fresh one on, and then a week later when somebody else is coming, you can put that one on. I'm just not in favor of wasting tons of paper, both financially and environmentally. So I think if we just rotate them around and tell our guests, I always give my guests, I'm sure you do, a tour of the room, and I can tell them, I assure you, even though it's not 100% brand new full roll, I assure you nobody has touched this in 5 days or whatever. I think they'll believe me. So document every time that you clean something. God forbid something gets contract traced back to your inn. You want to be able to show that, yes, you spritzed that doorknob, every 2 hours or whatever it was, and be able to show that. I kind of think that's it, clean with whatever cleaner. And so, yeah, if you want to be using your essential oils, that's fine if that works as a cleaner and removes enough of the grime. And as long as you go back afterwards and spray it well, And spray everything you can, right? Dresser drawer handles. I mean, I think we're all just gonna have to get to know our rooms very intimately and think like, what could someone have touched in here? And then everything else, we can't do anything about. We can't disinfect a sofa. Can't. So we won't. I think that's my official report. Farrell, do you have something to add, and anybody else?
Nope, I think you got it all. Again, you know, just for everyone, know your surface, know your cleaner, know your contact time, and again, and understand that we can disinfect a bathroom, but we can only, again, soft surfaces can't be disinfected. They can only be sanitized. And, you know, yeah, just kind of working on those best practices that you kind of went through, Karen.
Yeah, and I think an important point you made is that time is a disinfectant. So if we are in a situation of having relatively few guests, you know, rotate rooms, leave them empty for 3 days, you know, that is a good disinfectant right there. So our plan for toilet paper was to issue 4 sheets per person in the morning and 4 sheets in the evening. We thought that would work well.
So I was watching a webinar last week, and the speaker was talking about how to methodically process a room. And he had this method called follow the wall. So when you walk into a room, did you see that, Carol? You're nodding your head. Yeah. So, you know, just start to your left and just keep following the wall and wipe every surface or spray every surface so that you know you've covered everything. So. Oh,
Were they suggesting disinfecting the walls?
No, not necessarily the walls, but like light switches, like you're saying, but just to make sure that you've touched all the surfaces along the walls, whether it's your, you know, nightstand or a lamp or lamp switch. So
it's creating a one-way path.
I'm sorry?
Create a one-way path that you go
Right.
around. That's
Yeah.
really what it meant. But following a wall is just a way of go around a room in a circle, basically.
Yeah. The other thing I was curious about is, Eric, if you've received any information from Bob. I know Bob and Alan have issues today, but about food service.
No, I have not heard anything new. Bob sent me something a couple of days ago, and to be honest with you, I haven't looked at it because I was going to post it. So, but anything that I got, he sent to the lodging list. So I'm not sure. I don't think so. And Sean, that mustache is so dirty. I love it. Speaking when you start talking about it, all this cleaning, that just looks badass.
I thought everyone just moves to Vermont and grows a beard. I finally, you know, I just.
Willie, I think you should go that route.
Yeah. I've tried that route, and I get a Fu Manchu. I get it here and here. That's it.
And what's the problem?
I got more hair coming out of my ears.
That might be the problem.
It's an age thing.
Okay, listen, it's coming up to 11 o'clock. I think we should wrap. We certainly seem to be getting a lot of value out of this. So same time next week will be the plan. And in the meantime, you know, keep information circulating on the lodging list and try not to get totally overwhelmed by information overload. So thanks for everyone's contribution.
I'll send out an invite for next week at 10 o'clock. Take care, folks.
Enjoy some sunshine over the next few days. Bye for now.
Bye.